The Jaws franchise is a perfect example of diminishing return, and I'll dive in a little bit more on that a bit later. But the short of it is, it's not a hot take. The first movie is perfection, and the sequels, well...
What the hell is even that?
Yeah, like I said, we'll get into that a little bit later, but for now, let's talk about the first mega summer blockbuster, a movie that literally changed the way Hollywood produced and marketed its movies, a horror icon so scary that he made an entire generation scared to go in the water, Jaws. Released in 1975 and directed by then relatively unknown but future superstar director Steven Spielberg, the film's initial budget of only $3 million and 55-day shooting schedule ballooned to $12 million and a reported 159 days to finish. And this was mainly because of technical difficulties arising from this being the first film primarily shot in the middle of the ocean that had never been done before. Most films were shot either in a closed studio or in the shallow water, but Spielberg wanted to go out in the middle of the ocean and make it look authentic. And that created all sorts of problems, from ships wandering into shots to obviously bad weather. You have the salt water that is eroding and rusting these three mechanical sharks. You've got water repellent skin that absorbs water. So Spielberg just had a bunch of problems. But because of that, he had to make a big budget shark movie with no shark. So he channeled his inner Hitchcock and he went with the POV shots that, backed by that brilliant Williams score, he's alluding to the presence of the shark, but never showing it. And it creates a unique sense of fear and dread that rivaled anything that he could create on camera back in 1975. The mind can create such horrible, horrible things, and Spielberg played on those human traits beautifully. And despite all the problems, the producer's faith in this young director and his crew was well placed, and the gamble saw a return of $477 million in worldwide box office sales. That was a record that would stand until Star Wars was released just a few years later. The motion picture Jaws is based off the novel written by Peter Benchley, who actually drafted 3 of the original drafts of the screenplay. But Spielberg wanted to not only inject a little bit of levity and comedy into the movie, but he also dropped a couple of the subplots, one being Hooper's affair with Ellen Brody, which I think was a good call. Instead, he decided to go with the simple story of a giant man-eating shark terrorizing a small Massachusetts island community. And it leads to several fatalities and then desperate 3 men, one being Police Chief Brody, another marine biologist Matt Hooper, and then the third, a deranged shark hunter Quint, all set out to hunt this shark. Spielberg saw the beauty in the simple story that was and wanted to highlight those men. And all the co-stars do their job. And I'd like to give a special shout out to Murray Hamilton as Mayor Larry Vaughn, who was the only person I actually wanted the shark to eat. He set the standard for douchebag and has to be one of the worst people we've ever seen on screen. So bravo there. But the strength of this film is, of course, in its leading men. I've always enjoyed the first half of the film, but to me, it doesn't really peak until the men head out on the Orca. Robert Shaw's Quint is a lovely foil to the 2 more level-headed and logical men, and his monologue about the USS Indianapolis is chilling, while also showing his Ahab-like obsession with sharks.
1,100 men went into the water. Vessel went down in 12 minutes. Didn't see the first shark for about half an hour. Tiger, 13-footer, you know that when you're in the water, Chief? You tell by looking from the dorsal to the tail.
So much so that he even named his boat after their only natural predator. So I've always thought that these men sort of represented different faults in humans, with Brody being, the embodiment of fear, and obviously at the end, rising to face that fear. Hooper loosely represents overconfidence.
Let's tow it in.
Don't worry, Martin. Nothing's gonna happen.
He has his fancy tech. He stupidly dives into as he said, shark hunting waters to go after that, downed boat. Not the brightest decision. So he was certainly overconfident that his tech, would keep him safe. The shark cage. He didn't want to get in the shark cage, but he does, and it fails, and he almost dies. And then Quint, as I said, is the representation of obsession, mad obsession, and it ends up leading to his downfall. But the scene of the men bonding over their various scars feels more like a hidden camera bit than an actual scene from the movie, and it works so well at fleshing out these men before the action begins. And the boat scene, they only take up about the final 50 minutes of the film, but they're so powerful and so much happens, it feels like most of the film is actually the men on the Orca. And of course, one of the highlights of the first film is the music. I mean, it's freaking John Williams. It's arguably one of the most famous movie scores of all time, and there's literally nothing that I could add that hasn't already been said. It's perfection, and it's an amazing idea that harkens back to the 50s monster movies with the POV shots and the music alluring to the shark's presence. In a way, the mechanical issues likely added to the success of this film, because I do believe if we saw the shark more, it would have lessened the impact of the ending sequences. I'm not sure if that's true or not. Well, I guess we'll have to wait and see with the later movies. And the ending is easily the best in the franchise. It's the best in shark movie genre as a whole, and it's in contention for one of my favorites of all time. We got Brody alone, having just watched, at least in his mind, both of his mates get devoured. He smartly tosses a tank into the shark's mouth and proceeds to throw one of the coldest lines in movie history.
Fire, you son of a...
Before delivering the kill shot. It's an all-timer ending to an all-time great movie, 10 out of 10. And of course, with the success of this film, there had to be a sequel, right? Doing a sequel to a movie like Jaws is difficult largely because of the open and shut narrative of the original movie. I mean, the shark is dead. The threat to Amity is gone. Where do you go from here? So Spielberg knew that it was a wasted effort, at least for him, and elected not to return. But this did nothing to stop producers from greenlighting a sequel because of the amazing profit of the original, grossing $477 million, again on just a $12 million budget. So we end up with Jaws 2 just 3 years later. The film did well in spite of lukewarm reviews, grossing $200 million on just a $20 million budget. Not nearly as profitable as the first film, but still a really solid haul, and enough to ensure that this franchise would live another day. And the only reason that this movie, at least to me, is watchable is because of the return of Roy Scheider as Chief Brody. It's been famously reported that Scheider had zero interest in returning to this film because of the miserable experience that he had at sea during the filming of the first movie. And in order to get out of his ongoing contract with Universal, he agreed to take part in this sequel if they released him immediately afterwards, which is exactly what happened. And hilariously, Scheider accepted a role in Blue Thunder so that he was unavailable and couldn't possibly be persuaded to be in Jaws 3D. Now, had they found a more creative way to put Brody back in the path of a killer shark, maybe this could have turned into a halfway decent, I'll be completely unnecessary sequel. But what we got is just way, way, way too close a rehash of the original, with the mayor's greed causing him to ignore all the terrible things happening as Brody tries to save the summer beach crowd from a man-eating shark, only to end up basically all alone against the beast face-to-face of the final showdown, where he uses a man-made object to attack the shark via its mouth and kill it. Sound familiar? It's not bad. I mean, it worked the first time, and on its own, this would have been a decent shark movie if the first one didn't exist. But it does, and the need for this sequel just isn't there. The story is uninspired. The supporting cast a gigantic step down with the departures of Richard Dreyfuss and Robert Shaw. And then you lose one of the greatest directors of all time. Well, I'm sorry, Jaws 2, but you will always be just a slightly okay but gigantic step down from your big brother. I do find myself watching this movie from time to time, but I do not recommend watching this back to back with the original. It shows just what a shallow imitation it truly is. 5 out of 10. Oh, Jaws 3. I truly admire the ambition. I do respect the attempt to make a sequel that separates itself from the first movie. Unfortunately for them, they leaned way too hard into the 3D gimmick, and paired with the lack of Spielberg, you don't have Williams' music other than the original score, and no returning Scheider as the conquering hero, so this movie just lacks its soul. I mean, it's harmless fun at times, and 7-year-old Justin absolutely adored this movie. But in spite of poor critic and audience reaction, Jaws 3 somehow still managed to make nearly $90 million worldwide on just a $20 million budget. But I think that could be attributed mainly to the rising popularity of the 3D gimmick in the 80s, as well as a lack of any summer contenders at the box office in 1983. So it's cool to see a young, coked up Dennis Quaid run around for 90 minutes, and we also get the feature film debut of Leah Thompson of Back to the Future fame. But during my most recent rewatch, I just found myself drifting off during parts of the movie. The attack scenes feel less vicious. I'm not a big fan at all of all the stock, like shark film footage that they use. And we rarely see the shark surface. Excluding fin shots, this shark only breaches the surface one time to attack Leah Thompson's character. That's it. That's not necessarily a bad thing, I guess. It's just different than the previous two movies, which feature many shots of the shark attacking unsuspecting swimmers and boaters. And when executed well, these scenes are horrifying. So I do love the change of scenery. This is the only movie in the series not to feature a single scene on Amity Island, which for me works. I mean, how many times can the same place be terrorized by a giant great white shark? So the idea of a killer shark trapped in a SeaWorld-like amusement park is very cool, and likely the reason young me was so hooked on this movie. This is also the only film to feature two great white sharks, but once we got a decent view of the first shark, we knew it wasn't our shark, and if there was supposed to be a twist, the twist that there is a baby and a mama certainly doesn't land, because we knew that that was not the predator shark. But at least when they bring Big Mama out, things escalate quickly and we move at a pretty decent pace towards the infamous finale. Now let's talk about the finale for a second. For better or worse, I'll never forget this shot. I loved it as a kid. I thought it was super cool and creepy, but now it's just funny and a solid reminder of why 3D never took off. And for the second time in 3 movies, they also kill the shark via explosion, so they're already running out of interesting and creative ideas for dispatching of the creature. So my final thought is, this could possibly be the worst closing shot in cinema. Someone show me one worse than this. Now, just a few years later, with the franchise back in the hands of Universal, the impending launch of the Jaws ride at Universal Studios prompted them to greenlight a third Jaws sequel to hype up the new ride, and it was rushed into production. Now, this film sees the return of Lorraine Gary's Ellen Brody, the wife of Chief Brody from the first 2 films, but this seems to completely ignore the third film happened, because we see the Brody guys recast again for the 3rd time, and the death of Sean is the jumping off point of this film and the reason Ellen goes to the Bahamas to be closer to her eldest son, Mike. Now, if the chop to shit attack on Sean at the beginning of the movie didn't get you to turn this one off, the shot of the shark following the Brodies on a plane ride down to the Bahamas just might do it. However, if you decide to keep watching, your reward is an absolutely delightful Michael Caine, missing his Oscar win, but paying for a new house and being the only person who seems to understand what kind of film he's in. Did I mention that Ellen Brody now has a psychic link to the shark somehow and can feel its presence? Yeah, it's as absurd as it sounds. Because of the additions of the aforementioned Caine as seaplane pilot / Mama Brody love interest Hoagie, along with Mike's work partner Jake, I will give this film a decent review on the supporting cast, but that's about all the praise I can give. Hoagie and Jake are both charming side characters, but I hate the double fake out deaths. One of them should have actually died. It's not like we needed them to return for the 5th movie. Now, remember when I complained previously about the shark never breaching in part 3? Well, After seeing this movie again, I withdraw my complaints. Stay under the damn water if this is the best we can do. And the ending is lame. The shark is roaring. The shark is roaring. Yes, I said that. The shark is roaring before it's killed. And it's unintentionally hilarious. This movie, simply put, shouldn't exist. And it commonly finds itself on the worst movie of all time's list. And it's a terrible Jaws movie. It's a terrible sequel, and it's deserving of that spot. I am sorry to everyone who worked hard to make this movie happen. It's not your fault. Universal set you up to fail. Nobody sets out to make an all-time shitty movie, but here we are, and I don't see this one being unseated anytime soon. So, in conclusion, the Jaws franchise really shouldn't be a franchise. It should be a movie. One perfect movie. But as in many cases, Hollywood can't see past the dollar signs. And like I said at the beginning, no matter how much extra money they threw at this IP, they kept seeing less and less return on their investment. Part of that is the diminishing quality of the product. Part of that is fatigue from the dozens of Jaws ripoffs we saw over the ensuing 12-year gap between Part 1 and Part 4. But really the main reason is what was left to do. What more could they have done with such a simple story? You'll never catch lightning in a bottle twice, but they tried and failed 3 times. And because of that, we have 4 movies that just get increasingly more expensive to make and less interesting to watch. Not a recipe for sustained success. I'm glad they exist, if nothing else, as a cautionary tale to Hollywood not to milk these dead IPs to death. I'm glad they got the message. Wait, what? Be sure to comment down below and let me know when the Jaws franchise died for you. Are you a fan of any of the sequels? What's the most laughable part of any of the movies? For me, it's the roaring of the shark at the end of Revenge. Makes me laugh every time. I appreciate you all tuning in, and as always, be good people, be good to each other, and I'll catch you next time on eNerdtainment.
Yeah.